Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon to everyone today. Thank you for joining us for our DynaChange webinar, and thank you in advance to start off with thank you to Adam Fink for participating today. As you know, the webinars are brought to you from the Profit 21 Worldwide User Group Education Committee, which was formed back in April 2008 by the Board of Directors, and that was just to start using our programs and all the educational offerings from ACT event. Thank you to our Education Committee members. We have Joe Murphy and Renee Savage, Doug Deerzak, David Brown, Eric Pargman, Ron Thomason, Todd Tavener, Michelle Peterson, and Nancy Brinchero joins us from ACT event on occasion. Thank you to our User Group Board of Directors. We have Don Preston and Brian Williams, Shelby Scanlon, Landon Edwards, and Sam Snow. Thank you to all their dedication to the Users Group and getting ready for conference, and they've been busy, so it's a lot of fun. As always, our disclaimer, please make sure that any changes you make, you run by your system admin, use your Play database as much as possible, ask questions, and test. Save the date, March 9th to 11th, 2011. It is our user conference in the Gaylord Palms Hotel and Convention Center in Kissimmee, Florida. We hopefully will be opening registration soon. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask us at any time. Oh, and if you're interested in moderating a session, let us know. As you know, these webinars we bring to you almost every week. We've got some great ones coming on the horizon to the end of the year. We will not be having one the week of Thanksgiving, so just to keep that in mind. If you have any suggestions for topics or you'd like to lead a session, you can reach me at the contact information up on the screen. Additionally, you can find me on the forum and you can always send me a message there as well. I'm going to pass the floor over to Adam, and thank you so much for pulling this session together for us today.
Thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl, I presume you can hear me okay, so I guess everyone can. I'd like to just sort of start by giving you a little bit about me. I'm currently a P21 external consultant, and I'm currently supporting approximately 6 companies. I've been doing ERP since 1988, and I've been doing P21 since 2004. And I've been teaching sessions for the Users Conference since 2006. A lot of the areas that I specialize in: triggers, DynaChange, customizing forms, Crystal, data extract, data import, sales tax, accounting, and training and documentation. This webinar is scheduled to be an hour. I'm going to try and get through a lot of subject matter in that time. I believe that you can communicate with Cheryl anytime during the webinar, and if there's something that you'd like to ask, or Cheryl figure out whether or not to let me know and I can slow down or go faster, or if there's something that I can try and show, I'd be more than happy to try. So what are the reasons for using DynaChange? The two areas that I'll be covering basically are the concept of visually enhancing the application. If you can remove clutter from screens, if you can highlight fields, if you can make important data stand out, I think a lot of people find that it also will reduce mistakes. People are better at completing their tasks. It'll take them less time, and they'll actually become more efficient. One of the users out there has done a fair amount, and in their example they used a lot of coloring. They didn't delete any fields, they didn't remove any fields, but they made everything sort of easier to read. So you can see an example of that. I think there's been some examples that have been going through the users group of people asking for, what do you do with DynaChange, and what do you do? And I think it's great that people share the kinds of things that they've done, because visually enhancing the application is an important part of the process of using the system. It's kind of drab, it's gray, it's boring. Even with the color changes available in V12, it's still primarily a pretty boring screen. Yes, you can use Control Roller Scroller and you can make the screen bigger, but you the idea of having colors and field backgrounds and things like that really does make it better. Also, I mentioned that if you want, you can keep the legacy naming of fields. People transition from one system to another, and during the initial startup, if you want to call a field by its legacy name, that's one of the ways that you can use DynaChange. Allow people to kind of transition more smoothly, and then, after time, you can perhaps get rid of some of those nomenclatures. And the other part of the features of DynaChange really is that it controls all of the security. You can prevent people from getting to applications. You can prevent people from getting to tabs. You can eliminate tabs because of the field chooser. You can prevent people from getting to fields. You can make things visible. You can make things invisible. You might also have a situation where required fields become different between branch to branch or company to company. So you might want to have, like, for example, the job field in order entry as a required field for company A, but not for company B. Those are the types of things that we're going to be going through. And so let me talk about how the structure works. You have two different levels of DynaChange control. The first is a level called role, where you would assign a person to a role, and then you would do DynaChange and you would set it up for the role. You also have the ability to set it up at the user. A situation where you would perhaps use user instead of role would be if you had a small number of people, where people wear multiple hats, people have to cover for people on vacations. You might have a situation where you want someone to have access to somebody else's screen but not be able to change things. One of the good examples I used early on in setting up DynaChange was when people weren't permitted to approve things. You could, without using the approval controls, because you wanted them to be automatic, you could protect the field and have it default to unapproved. But then there were issues with people forgetting to approve orders and things weren't getting processed. So you have to make sure you balance between what type of security you want and how much flexibility you want versus the concept of going back to the audit trail and finding out what somebody did and helping them learn from their mistakes. I hope that made sense. And the other question would be, is there turnover? So if you're using user and new people are being hired, you have to copy the DynaChanges from Bob to Sam. You don't want to just simply change Bob's login to Sam because you're changing information in the system. So you create the new login, but then all the DynaChanges would have to be, if they're set at the user, you'd have to then copy them all to the new user. And copying DynaChanges is very difficult. There's no shortcuts. Do people fall into a logical role? You might have, an accounting person, but you might have people who are just AR. Then you'd have to have somebody who has an accounting role and somebody else who has an AR role. But then all of a sudden you have somebody who generates checks and you don't want someone else to be able to generate checks, so you create an AP role. Well, I think in most of the examples I've seen companies end up with approximately 20 roles. It's not too bad. It's not too complex, especially if you have a lot. But then if you have to give somebody someone else's privilege, then you're making changes at the user level in addition to having changes at the role level. So you've got a person and their privilege is AP, but you're also giving them some AR screen, so you've modified their specific user. Those are the types of things I can show you how to do, but it's also something that you may decide you don't want to do. So how do you kind of structure all of this? The first thing you do is you begin by setting up the structure in Excel. So the users group has a file out there that looks like this, and it's a menu structure of P21. So if I'm looking right now at the accounts receivable structure, they're getting almost everything in accounts receivable. This is just a visual tool. This is not, you can't take the functionality in this and automatically populate P21. You got to step by step through it. But it's nice to be able to see what you're going to give somebody so that they can understand what their privileges are, and then you can put it into the system from the spreadsheets. And so each of the different tabs down here at the bottom are for different roles. So once you've set up the structure, you can then have the, you can yellow highlight, or you can use some sort of color coding to say this is what this person gets, and you can go through all of the different modules and screens and figure out what structure you want. Now this is the way that you do before you go live to get everything set up correctly. Once you've gone through the setup, everybody's agreed, yes, these are the right privileges, then you would go into P21 and you would start setting up the structure. So you create all the new roles, and P21, you do that in System Administration Role Maintenance. And in Role Maintenance, you can see all of the different roles that are set up within the system. Okay? You would then assign the roles to people, and you would also define their DynaChange privileges. So in user maintenance, you might have a person who has a role of purchasing, and you might also say whether or not they have the right to modify screens or modify the system. So what I'm going to show you in a few minutes is that I've created user IDs, which are specifically called the roles, and I've given them role privileges. So this particular login, purchasing, is able to go into the system and modify its role only. It's not able to change any users. It's not allowed to change itself. It's only allowed to change the role. And you'll see why I do that. You're then going to create the additional logins for each role. And this is something that is optional. Obviously, you don't have to do this because you can use the admin login to change all DynaChanges. And that's something that I would presume the vast majority of people do. But in order to set it up, in addition to having the P21 login, you're also going to go into SQL and create a login for that particular role. So you'll see CSR I have here, AP I have here. I have different roles. And then within each database, I can see that I've given purchasing access to this database called CC Prod, and CSR has access, and AP has access. So I've given out the privilege there. The way that you can do that when you create the user in SQL is this is the create screen, but it's now in just edit mode. You can just come over to the user mapping, check the checkbox for CC Prod, and that gives the person access to P21 database. Then when you go into P21, you just log in using standard authentication, and you come into the system as a purchasing person, but this is strictly for the purpose of managing the DynaChange. So I've created a login that has specific privileges for purchasing and nothing else. Why do I do this? I do this because I want to check to make sure that I've set up the DynaChanges correctly. I do this because I want to be able to modify the DynaChanges specifically. So if I go into the system, it does have DynaChange designer rights. I right mouse button to get to this. And when I go in, I can modify the screen. But when I change something, and I'm not going to save this, I'll just move a field. When I click Save, it's only going to give me the ability to save this for purchasing and nothing else. So the privilege that I've given is purchasing. The login has the ability to see all of the purchasing DynaChanges, and it also will enable me to modify any DynaChanges that I've created. Okay? So I assign the roles to people. So after I check to make sure that the purchasing structure is all correct, then I can go in and I can find the users. I can go in and I can assign them purchasing, and I can give them no designer rights. So if I looked at a user login, and this one probably won't be a good example, but say, for example, I had a user's name, I would just simply choose none in designer rights. The user would get the role of purchasing. The designer rights would be none. So the structure of the user would be to have a role assigned, but designer rights none. There is a designer rights user, but giving an individual user the ability to modify their own screens could get them in more trouble than it's worth managing. So I don't believe that people use this option, but it is there. So typical setting for a user is name the role and the designer rights is none. Okay, the next thing you would do after you set up this structure is you would actually go in and create your menu tab DynaChanges as well as your screen DynaChanges. Then you can go back to the user login that you created for each role, excuse me, and you could test each setup. Okay, so let's get into DynaChange. So the menu DynaChanges that you do really are designed around preventing people from accessing either a module, any of the maintenance or system options, or any of the transactions and reports. So if I go back to my spreadsheet for a second, and I see, let's look at AP, for example. So AP basically has full access to AP, they have full access to contact management, and they've got a couple of screens in purchasing. So if I go back into P21, and I go in, and I want to make sure I'm in the right one here. So I'm currently logged in as AP on this one. So this is my AP, so I'm going to remember I'm using pink right now for my AP, and I can see that I've got basically all of AP. I've got access to all of it. The structure is set up the way I want it, and I've also set up temporarily access to order entry for the purposes of this demo. So there's really a modification to the way that I've set things up. But I'm going to go in here. And I'm going to just open up, let me just get to a screen. And I'm going to just, you need to be in a screen in order to get to the DynaChange option. So I'm going to change the menu designer. And it says, do you want to modify the menu AP? And I say yes. And it's thinking really hard. And it popped up behind, I guess. All right. So the way that the structure works, you can see, for example, that there's a big red X next to secondary processing. And that's showing that they can't get into that particular module at all. So what I'm going to do for this guy is I'm going to take away the system option. I'm going to take away the maintenance option, and in the transactions, I'm going to take away everything but order entry. Actually, I'll leave RMAs. So I'll leave orders and RMAs, and I'll wipe out the rest. And so I'm showing you an example of how you would have to manually step through this in order to remove the privileges. So right now, he's got no maintenance. He's got just orders and RMAs. And in Inquire, I'm going to leave the order drill downs, but I'm going to take away everything else. So this is a simple menu designer change. This is the structure you go through. Obviously, I'd be working from my spreadsheet when I set this up. And then in reports, I'm not going to give many reports. because we use Crystal. I'll go ahead and save that. It says update was successful. I'm now going to close AP because the system will not refresh those menus until you leave the system. I'll re-log in as AP. I know I'm in AP because I'm running in pink. And if I go down to orders, I now see that I'm restricted to the order drill downs and the two remaining options in order entry, orders and RMAs. That was a very simple change to a menu structure. I did it in the role of AP. I logged in as AP, and I made the change for AP, and it was a very simple way to manage the change process. It also gives me an easy way to check to make sure that I did it right. Okay, let me just open another screen. Okay, one of the other things that you can do with the menu designer designer behind. One of the other things you can do, for example, is you have this order entry. Now, I know most of you know this, so I'll just show you anyway. You have this little white bar in version 12 where you can start to type information down here, and it'll show you all of the matching screens in the system that have those set of letters that you try, so you can use shortcuts. You also have, of course, the ability to set something into My Menu, right? But this little search feature down here is important because if you're in DynaChange Designer and you want to change something, excuse me, I could also say something like this. In the search text, I could put in customer returns. So now when the option is visible on the screen, instead of it just reading RMAs, it could also say customer returns, so that if people come down to the little search bar and they start to type in returns, they could also get to the RMA screen as well. So this is a way of making the functionality a little slicker, is the ability to edit transaction names in the menu. Okay, so I showed how you can prevent access to the different options, and you can also rename menu items. And if you don't use the approach which I've set up, where you have the individual logins for each of the individual roles and the modification process that I use, and you're using the admin login, then you might also want to consider using, especially if you're using 11.5 or previous, there is an option when logged in as admin. When you make a modification to a menu in DynaChange, you have the Apply to All Modules option. That should be checked when using the older version of DynaChange. Okay, you also need to understand one of the pieces of functionality of DynaChange. This entire structure that I've created, I can get rid of in one simple click, which is with the erase button. So that erase button is to delete. So I've set up this entire structure. I can also wipe the whole thing out with one simple click. So this will actually delete from the system, physically right out of the SQL tables, wipe them out completely, as opposed to just setting a delete flag. In DynaChange Designer, the delete is actually an erasing of records in the system. So you can't just undelete once you've deleted like you can with all the other delete flags. Okay. Oh, the RMB options. So when you're on a screen and you have other things appearing at the top of your screen, those are called right mouse button options. Those exist in the menu tree as well. And there is the ability to protect or remove these as well. So you have not just the restriction from what appears over on the menu tree in the primary application, but you also have the option to address the right mouse button options in the system. Now, some of these are screen specific. For example, capture usage, order disposition, exclude rebates. These are screen specific. The ones down here, tasks, services, edit, my menu, help, these are system-wide. So when you're doing DynaChange of menus, sorry about the response time. So you'll notice that if I go into any of these areas, I don't see anything other than the choices that exist within those particular modules. However, in the main menu section, you have the ability to take away some of the features and functionality of the primary application. So if I don't want to give out item master inquiry, I can get those here because they're up on the inquire option up here. I can also get rid of the ability for people to change their styles and their themes and things like that. So these are features that are available to all users that you can take away. In 11.0, you can remove tasks, services, and some of the other functionality, but I haven't been able to understand where they're hidden on 12.0 to remove things like tasks. If you want to remove them, I don't see the option anymore. But then again, I haven't played with it lately. So you don't forget, when you have DynaChange to menu, you do have the ability to control some of the additional features that people have. Okay, I'm going to move on to tab DynaChanging now. And for this, what I'd like to do is I'm currently logged in here as a CSR, customer service rep. So in order entry, well, actually, I'm sorry, I want to go to purchasing. I want to give order entry the ability to add suppliers, but I don't want them to be able to do very much in supplier maintenance. So let me go over to supplier maintenance. So in supplier maintenance, there's a lot of fields, a lot of tabs and a lot of fields. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to go into DynaChange Designer, Tab Designer. And in this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make this screen much simpler. So I'm going to turn a bunch of tabs into invisible. I'm going to leave physical address. And let's see, I don't need custom column, document links, contacts, audit trail. Okay, I'm going to save this, assign it to the CSR. And this is called Purchasing Module, Supplier Maintenance, Tabs. And I'll explain my naming convention a little later on. Okay, so I've just made a change. In order to refresh this screen, I'm going to close it and reopen it. Okay, so I'm now down to 4 tabs. Okay, one of the things that that you can do in these tabs as well is you can change the color. So I'm going to just edit it again. And since it defaults to the supplier tab, what I really want to do in this case is I want to change vendors to red. So I'll make that change. Simple little addition. Okay, now my vendors tab is red. Okay. In addition, you have the ability to, if you choose to use a font change, it actually impacts essentially all tabs. So the most common use of a font change is just strictly to change things to bold. Now you'll notice that when I did that, it spread every tab. It makes them all wider. It does that by design. You can't actually change whether or not it does it. But what happens when you do that is that it won't appear as though they're bold until you're actually clicked on them. So they'll look like plain text. When you click on them, they'll become bold, just like this example. So you'll see that it's all plain text until you actually click on it, then it's bold. So all it really did was spread the tabs out wider. So I recommend not using bold because it just simply spreads out the tabs and it doesn't really accomplish anything other than adding space. If I wanted to wipe out all of my changes, I have the erase button again here, and it will allow me to get rid of my DynaChanges completely. Okay. I want to move on to screen DynaChanges now. So I think the majority of the changing that people do is with screens. So in this example, I have taken, this is a simplified version of order entry. The ship to has been moved all the way to the top. It's where the cursor begins. I've added text. I've flagged approved with a different color. So I've made a lot of visual changes to this particular example. And I'm going to go through all of these things so you can see how all the pieces work. So I'm going to go into Screen Designer. One of the nice things about P21 Screen Designer in 12, I think it's since about 12.1 or 2, was that you can actually change to the view column values. So if the field names are distracting, that's fine. If you bring up the transaction first, you can actually see information. So let me go into Designer again. If I view column values, I can actually see what they look like. And I can make changes to fields. I can make changes to things. So let me show you some simple changes. So, for example, I have the PO number field. I can change the text. Okay. Now you might notice that the size of this field looks like I almost ran out of space. I can make it a little bit wider by just changing the width, and that's a number. You'll notice, by the way, that all of these fields are left aligned, so they're all exactly straight. If you look at any one of these individual fields, you'll see that the y-axis is a 112, a 196, a 276, but all of the x-axes are 549s. So you can also control, and Activin likes to refer to this as the x factor. So if you just simply take note of what the numbers are in a field, you can come into the x and y fields and control exactly where something is. So if I want to move something, I can change its row by just changing where it is, and then I can just bring it back by just knowing what that number was, where it was at. These fields are also now controllable through a feature called Align. So if you have the ability to grab a couple fields, there's a way here. Grab more than I wanted. Try again. So if you grab a bunch of fields, you have the ability to align them, which is this one right here, so the left align. So if you're setting something up and things are a little bit off, you have the ability to use the multiple align. That's a really nice tool. Fields can also be protected. So, for example, if you don't want someone to be able to change, let's see, like the taker field, you can just protect it so it's visible, but it's not editable. So the protection is available. You can make a field required. So, for example, the purchase order number field, you want to make it a required field, you just check the required box, and it'll now make it a required field. The system will actually say the purchase order number, the PO field is a required field. So you might typically not want to change the description of a field if you make it required, because the error message should probably match. Let's see, you can change the fonts of fields. So I've got this order method. If I want to change the size, I can change the size of the font. I can change the color of the font. The way you change color is using the color bar down at the bottom. If you left mouse click on a field, it changes the text. If you right mouse click on a field, it changes the background. So I'm going to go back to gray background, and I'm going to go back to the black text, and I'm going to go back to the font of 8, so I can get it back to the way it was. You also have the ability to create a border. So if you want to take a field and you want to stick a border around it, you can. So there's lots of different ways to make things stand out. You want to change the background color of a field. You highlight the field, and then you can change the background color of the field by using a right mouse click. Let's pick a different color. These are the types of things that are easy to do. The Shift to ID, the customer IDs are both bold. You can unbold them, those types of things. You can also, what else? Obviously, you can move things around. I think that's pretty much it. What I'm not going to save this because it really doesn't need. What I did was all obvious. What I'd like to do instead is come down here to the bottom and show you something else, which is cool. And that's when you're designing a screen that has what's called a table. So this is a table structure. So it has multiple rows, and it has columns. So if, for example, all of your item numbers are a certain width, you could chop the size of the field down permanently as a part of a DynaChange. If you want to move a column, what you can do, remember how I mentioned the X factor? So, for example, if I have this rev field, it's at 1257. If I just come over to this quantity order field and I change it to 1257, it should just simply move the field to the left of the revision field. So that's an easy way in a table structure to move columns around. Single greatest application of this particular feature is in PORG, so that you can create a one-screen PORG. You just move only those fields that are pertinent to you over to the left-hand side, but you leave all the others in there. So you just figure out which ones are the fields you want, and then you structure your PORG screen so that each of the different tabs, the item, the special, the directs, you structure those screens so that they are highly organized around your use of PORG, and then it becomes a very simple screen to use. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, assign it to the CSR. This is order processing, this is orders, order entry, the items tab. Okay, and I'm going to close it, reopen it. Okay, so you can see the quantity order field has moved. It's now over to the left. The item ID field has been shrunk. So when you manipulate a table, this is a great thing to do. I have, for just about every company I've touched, I've also done the same thing to all of the little pop-up screens. So let me get customer ID to pop. It's not letting me. Let's put it here. So these screens as well are all modifiable through DynaChange as well. So when you go into a find screen, you have the ability to get rid of all the fields that you don't use, move all the ones that are pertinent to you into the right locations. You also have the ability to drag on the find screens where you can move them easily by just dragging them. People will really thank you, because if every single time you come into one of these screens, you see people do the following. They go to the ship to find, and then they scroll over here, and they click on the mail city, and then they say San Francisco, and that's how they're doing some of their searching. Well, if they're always searching on certain fields, you should be giving them the fields that they search on over here to the left, so that when they come into a screen, it's one of the main tabs on the main section of the first screen, so they don't have to do the extra process of scrolling. Get your find screens organized. Okay? Okay, so let's go into, this is my admin login. So I'm logged in here as admin. So my admin has DynaChange Designer. So in the DynaChange Designer, you can see all the DynaChanges. So for example, I was working in the CSR, and a few minutes ago, I just created the modification to the Items tab, where I put in, I shrunk the item ID field down, and I moved the order quantity. So you can see I have my DynaChange here. Now I found it pretty quickly, and if you'll notice, there's a logic to the naming convention. So let me first of all get through some of these other. So in the DynaChange Manager, you can review things by role, you can review things by user. So here it's by role, so CSR. If I come into the user section, everything is still pretty much stuck one-to-one because I'm using a database that I'm using primarily for the teaching of DynaChange, so it doesn't really have any real users. But within the role, I can then see all the different DynaChanges that are set up. And from here, if I wanted to modify any of the individual DynaChanges from the admin login, I just go up into the top box and I just say Edit. And it'll give me the same basic screen that I had a few minutes ago when I was logged in as CSR, modifying their menu. I see we have a couple of questions. Cheryl, you want to fire a question or two at me?
Absolutely. We've got a few that have just been filtering through during your session. So the very first one we have is, what is the Advanced tab for inside the Designer?
The Advanced view is the name of the screens that you see on the left-hand side, and the attribute is either enabled or disabled. So if you're a IT techie person and you want to control the information within the system instead of using the approach, which is to just simply check or uncheck the enable box, you could do that. So, for example, if I enable imports and exports and I come back over here, I can just, the imports, exports, I can, let's see, I believe that's the change I need to make, is just remove the enabled. But I'm not sure anybody would really want to do it this way when the approach is so simple to just be able to check a box or not. By the way, I'm currently logged into Menu CSR, so I'm looking at the CSRs. I do have the ability in here to actually set things. So, for example, a CSR is going to go into order entry. I can also add it to their My Menu from here. So you can set up people's My Menu as well. So that's one of the other features that's available. But I was in the DynaChange Designer, and I was able to pull up individual DynaChanges and edit them directly from this screen. And I think, like I said, most people use this approach, whereas I prefer the approach which is creating them through a particular login. Next question.
The next question is, does the Erase button delete the entire DynaChange or just the current session changes?
The Erase will find every single DynaChange that is attached to that particular screen, tab, or menu, and it will erase them from SQL. Completely gone.
The next question is, why is some text overlap on top of the other text within the screen DynaChange screen?
Okay, so you'll see here that there are a bunch of different fields that are standing on top of each other. Depending upon whether you're in a particular type of order or the order has a particular piece of information. So you might have things like required date, due date, planned date, all sitting on top of each other. If I kind of move them all off, you'll see required date and expiration date. So it's usually the same screen as an RMA, for example. This required date is sitting here if it's an order, and it's an expiration date if it's an RMA. And this one over here says payment hold or validation status. So this is a situation where you either have a return, again, an RMA or a regular order. And the same thing would be true here for these other fields. So the system figures out which screen you're in, and it displays the information in that particular location.
Now, can you change a checkbox to be defaulted to checked?
Can you change a checkbox that is unchecked to defaulted as checked?
Yes.
No, you cannot. However, when 12.0 came out and they implemented the DynaChange, there were 17 things on my wish list, and they got to 15 of them. So we got almost everything we wanted. The two things we didn't get was whether or not we could default a value into a field, and that would be either through the creation of default values at the user level and being able to populate them into a screen, and the other was whether or not you could default checkboxes or radio boxes. So we didn't get those, but they're still on the wish list.
The next question we have is, can you use DynaChange to add fields? For example, adding a description to the order entry screen.
Yes. In fact, I'm coming up now on the section of my presentation, which is the what's new in version 12. So I'll get to that in a second. Anything else?
Yeah, there's still a bunch. Now, do you want me to hold some of the questions so you can finish up?
Okay. Yeah. I'll get back to where I was. So.
Okay.
So in DynaChange Designer, let's say, for example, I want to take a particular screen, and the change that I made to this order entries for the CSR, and I want to give it to someone else. So here's an example of how copy would be used. I want to give this to purchasing, so I'm copying it from the CSR. So I'm going to be giving it the exact same name. And I'm copying it over to purchasing. So that little exercise that I just went through, if you have 100 DynaChanges for a particular role and you want to copy them to somebody else, you got to go through that over and over again. Whereas if you're logged in as admin and you go into the order entry screen, when you go to do a modification to the order entry screen, you have the option of giving that to a lot of different people. Which brings me to my second spreadsheet, which is the concept of managing the information. So you go through and you create DynaChanges, and you also keep track of who you've given those DynaChanges to. So it's easy to see in my naming convention that I'm using module, screen, tab, version. So if you look at the structure, yeah, I can see that this is, this is the customer maintenance and accounts receivable, and it happens to be the classes tab. And I have 3 different versions of it. I have one where I've protected class 2. I have another one where I've protected classes 1 and 2, and I have another one where I've protected class 1. So you can see AR gets one version, customer service gets another version, and AP gets a different version. So you can create multiple versions where you create them, but then you might want to keep track of who's got what, because I'm not keeping track of who's got what as a part of the DynaChange name. I'm also keeping track of everything that I changed. So I can see all of the different things that were done in a particular DynaChange. I've also listed, by the way, whether or not they're a screen change, a tab change. I don't keep track of menu changes this way. I keep track of menu changes using this other spreadsheet. The screens and tabs I manage here. And that way I can see for all the different roles what all the DynaChanges are. And if you'll notice, I was keeping track, some of them are blank, but I was keeping track of the custom object. Prior to version 12, I wrote a piece of code that allows you to copy DynaChanges from one 11 database to another 11 database. And And so one of the things that I had to worry about was these custom object IDs, because they were going to be different in every database, because the system assigns them as they get created. So I highly recommend that you keep track of everything that you've done in terms of DynaChanges so that you have a record of what it is. Now, some people would actually do screenshots and have asked me to do screenshots where I show the before and after so that you can have a visual representation as well. Let's see. So what's new in version 12? So you have the ability to move fields from tab to tab. So let me go back to AP for a second. And if I go into vendor maintenance, actually I want to go back into CSR. So if I go into accounting, they have, they don't have that. Oh, I know what it was. Sorry. Let me log in as purchasing. And now purchasing should be allowed to create vendors, but we don't want them creating mistakes in vendors. So by going to vendor maintenance, what I would do in this case is two things. The first thing is I would take away a bunch of tabs, which I've already done. And the last thing that I would do, if you notice on the purchase order options tab, I have this supplier, and I've got this pay freight to. Well, what I'd really like to do, since I've already removed a bunch of tabs, I'm going to be editing. I'm going to take away this purchase order options tab. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the supplier to the first screen. So I'll go into Screen Designer, and I'll just go up here to Field Chooser, which is this little button right here, and I'm going to get the supplier, and I'm going to drag them onto the screen. So the Field Chooser allows me to bring in information from other places. But I don't like this supplier box being a box, so I'm going to just come up here and choose checkbox, because that's what it really is. And I'll change my width down to a smaller number. I'm going to bring it over here. I'm going to grab these, and I'm going to left align them. And then I'm going to bring this guy over and set him in. And voila, I'm done. And I save it. So this is AT, vendor maintenance, and it's the vendor tab. And that's an example of converting a field to a checkbox. So as long as the field type, and if you'll notice it's a data type character 1, as long as it's a data type character 1, that option up here to change it to a checkbox is enabled. Okay. Let's take a look at one other thing while I'm in there. I'm going to be running about 2 more minutes, Cheryl, just so you know.
Not a problem.
So in Field Chooser, if you are in order entry, you have this option called New, which allows you to create fields and add them to screens. Things like you could put the date and time onto a screen. You have the ability to put a calculated field into a screen. That's kind of a more advanced topic. But what I wanted to point out in Field Chooser is that essentially everything within the particular data set that's returned. So P21 in vendor maintenance goes out and it grabs 4 or 5 tables, and it brings all these tables in when you're actually writing a record, you're writing a record to multiple tables, and you're putting all that information in. Well, all of these screens all these fields that are listed here in the field chooser are all of the different fields that are available in the vendor maintenance and the related tables that are open from the screen. So you're able to bring in all the fields. If you wanted to, you could make vendor maintenance a single screen. It's a very easy screen to do that to. You know, especially if what you're doing is you're going to take the from the physical address table, you're just going to bring the copy mailing address button in and put it on the main screen. You can basically make vendor maintenance a single option screen. And that's the kind of thing that you do to make the world simpler for people to use it. The other thing you have the option to do, which is new in version 12, is you'll notice that, for example, this vendor maintenance has a separate icon that looks different than the P21 icons. If I right mouse click and choose Add to My Menu, what it'll do is it'll bring that particular icon up to the top of my screen, and I can get used to these icons. You'll notice, though, that they're not available throughout the system. So order entry, yes, it has an icon, and it has a pretty picture. But what about these other ones? So there's a way for you to go in and actually create icons and attach icons to these individual options. They have to be 16 by 16. They have to be bitmaps, or they can be 32 by 32 bitmaps. But if, for example, I'm using small icons up here, I would need them to be 16 by 16. If I was using large icons up here, I would want them to be 32 by 32. And then probably one of the greatest features, which was one of the items on my list that we got, and I think I showed it to you elsewhere, you have the ability to change the sequence in which a screen is visited. So for example, if I look at it right now, company ID is tab order 1, vendor ID is tab order 2, corporate is 4, mail address is 5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down the page. If I don't want that to be the sequence, if I want, for example, the central phone number to be first, I can just change it to a 1, and I can save it. And now when you come into the screen, your cursor will be in number 1. So when I go into vendor maintenance again, my cursor should begin in the central phone number field. So that tab order is a great feature. And it doesn't look like it did it. It should have been right down here. I did something wrong. I think you guys got the gist of it. I'm running late on time. So let me take some questions.
We have about 14 questions actually queued up. So, so let's start at the top, okay?
Okay.
One of the questions I'll address right off the top. This webinar has been recorded, and the recording will be posted to the forum. It takes about 24 hours for the recording to be ready, so you'll watch for it then. If you'd like a copy of the ongoing recordings, just send me a quick email. I'll add you to our email blast that goes out on Thursdays, and that's where you'll get that as well. We also post a copy of the PowerPoint, so you will find that on the forum as well. The easiest way to find it, use the search feature, put in DynaChange webinar, and it should come up right there. So just one moment now. First question I have for you now. When you edit/move a table column, does it change the tab order as well?
No, it does not.
Okay.
But there's no tab functionality in a pop-up. Oh, I'm sorry. In the table structure. Oh, I'm sorry. Like in order entry, the example I did. Yes, it will work its way across the screen.
Okay. And what does the insert option do within the screen DynaChange? What can you insert?
You can insert text. You can insert the date. You can, let's see, what else can you insert? Insert text and the date. You can also insert pictures. Yeah, so if you have something, you can bring a picture in. You have four options. You can put in a computed field. You can put in today's date. You can put in text. And they're all editable and controllable.
Okay.
And just a point on that. I think that adding pictures is dumb. I don't think that it's a very good idea. I think it's just a distraction. This is a data system. Keep it to that. The object group box will allow you to take things and allow you to, like if you wanted to put a box around a bunch of fields, you could do that. I'm not sure it's of any value. It's a nice feature, though, for somebody.
Now, one of the questions, can you show again where the edit option was when you were in the design version manager?
Sure. So okay, so if you go up to the top box and you right mouse click, you have edit, copy, and delete. You can also do a view roll members, all from the screen. So if I'm in purchasing right now and I'm looking at a screen and I say view roll members, it'll show me all the logins that have that particular one. And I have the ability to remove a version, remove a particular DynaChange, copy it, or edit it.
Now, can we edit tabs within the item maker inquiry, such as the FIFO cost box?
You can modify it, absolutely.
Can you show me about using the computed field in Screen Designer?
Okay, if I take the CSR order entry screen, let's see if I can give you an example of a computed field. So let's see, if I take, how about if I take customer ID and I divide by ship to ID. How's that? Okay, so I now have this field over here. I could put in a text, and that text is going to say computed, and I'll save it. And that was CSR. So let me go back to CSR. So let's close it. And let's go back into orders. And I have my computed field. And if they were both the same number, I should have a 1 in that field.
Okay, can default dates be removed, such as the order entry required date?
It can be made invisible, yes. Okay, let's see. I don't see my computed fields coming up there. See if I change this. Yeah, it's there. I might have put it too far over. Next question while this is coming up.
Sure. Can we hide columns in the tables or grid, and how can we stop users from clicking certain columns?
Yes, you can hide columns by changing the width to 0.
Okay.
The second half of that question was?
How can we stop users clicking certain columns?
Yeah, you can hide them. You can't stop them if it's visible. You can't stop them from seeing it. Okay, so now I have the computed field, and if I pull up, let's pull one up. Oh, shoot. I have a piece of custom code that didn't work. Okay, so my computed field came back as a 1. So that was an example of a computed field. You can see it was something where I used 2 numerics and performed the calculation.
In testing our conversion from 11.5 to 12, menu changes migrated correctly, but our screen changes made in 11.5 did not carry over to 12. Is this to be expected with the upgrade?
Well, actually, there is a way to copy them from system to system, because you can bring 11 changes forward through the same kind of script that I wrote for 11. Works in 12, but then I think it's going to probably corrupt something else. So I've tested the code that I wrote, but yes, I've heard a lot of people had problems when they upgraded to 12. The DynaChanges were one of the things that got damaged. The reason for that was that they changed from a two-table structure in SQL to the way they stored it. They changed it from 2 tables to 3 tables, and it made the conversion actually try to populate that third table. So there were some issues with people. I don't know what else to say, but check your DynaChanges carefully when migrating to version 12.
So I think we have time just for one last question, and then any other questions, just post them to the forum. I'm sure Adam will pick them up there and get the discussion with the rest of the group as well. So our last question for today, because we're running over time, is will version 12 give us the ability to add any custom columns that we have created to any screen?
No. So you want to take things that are currently in a custom column. So if I go into Ship to Maintenance, and I've created a custom column in Ship to Maintenance, can I take that custom field and move it to another tab? You know what? I'm not sure, and I'll tell you why I'm not sure. Because in Field Chooser, you do have the ability to use new, but it's really only in. No, that would only be an order entry. I take that back. No, you currently cannot move a custom column because they only exist in Ship to, Customer, Vendor, and Supplier Maintenance. So custom columns are not movable. But perhaps that's something that you should request as a part of an enhancement, enhancement request to P21. That when just so you know, there was an effort underway recently to discuss where the next improvements in DynaChange should appear, and the users were asked to vote, and a couple different places came out on top. I think Item Master Inquiry and Purchasing Report were the 2 highest, but those extensibility changes are something that Activent is anxious to make available in the next few releases. So I know there's more coming. But no, you currently cannot move a custom column to another tab. So you can't use the new option. You can't use the Field Chooser option currently.
Well, I think we better wrap up for today. I want to thank you, Adam, first of all, for going overtime. I know you have a busy day already planned, and for taking the time to pull together all this information for us. It's greatly appreciated. As we can tell with all the questions, this is definitely a topic that a lot of people are concerned about and are having trouble with. So post your questions to the forum. I know, Adam, you're on there regularly, so you can check there as well. Adam's put his contact information there up on the screen. You can contact him and let me know if you have any questions. I can always get them over to him as well. So thank you so much, Adam, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.